Okay, hello, good morning everyone, and welcome to this Supply Chain Sustainability School Business Bites, which is looking at tackling labour exploitation and modern slavery from very much a site perspective. So I'm EJ Allen, I'm going to be chairing today's session. I'm Sector Manager for the Construction and Homes Markets within the Supply Chain School. I'm also a consultant on all things modern slavery for Action Sustainability, which is the delivery partner that sits behind the school itself. Little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Because of the numbers of the size of the audience today, we've turned off your cameras and muted your microphones. However, we would like you to interact and engage as we go through the session. So two things. We will have time for Q&A a bit later on. So what I'd like you to do, if you have any questions for any of our speakers, please do use the Q&A function you'll see at the bottom of your screen. If you click on Q&A, you'll just be able to type in your questions. If there's a specific member of the panel who you'd like to pose that to, just put their name in there, and then we'll ask those questions at the end. Apologies in advance if we don't get a chance to answer all of your questions. We'll do our best, and if there are questions we haven't got back to you on, we'll do our best to get back to you after the event in the post-event follow-up. Also around interaction, we'd love you to get involved throughout. So we're going to be using a platform called Mentimeter. Most of you have been to school events in the past, will be very familiar with that, but please do join in. You don't need to download any apps, it's really simple. Lastly, we'll be recording today's session, so hopefully no need to make loads of notes, and we'll be sharing the slides afterwards. Okay, so let's get started. So what we're doing today is exploring the risks around labour exploitation and modern slavery, specifically from a site perspective, and hopefully will help you get to grips with the practical steps you can take to ensure ethical and lawful employment, looking beyond the kind of regulatory compliance side of things. We've got a brilliant speaker lineup. I'm really excited about today's event. So I'm going to start today with a very little bit of scene setting, and then looking at the modern slavery side of things. Then I'm going to hand over to Doug, who's going to, at Achilles, who's going to be talking about changing legislations and expectations relating to addressing ethical employment. And he's going to share some of the findings from their site audits. We're then going to hear the client's perspective. So Charlotte is a human rights lead at Sky, and she's going to be sharing some practical insights based on case study work that they did to understand and address the risk of labour exploitation on site. We're going to get that main contractor perspective, and we've got both Maria and Luciana from Multiplex. And then lastly, we're going to be looking at the remediation side of things. So the piece around, okay, if you find a victim, then what? And it's very often, what we see is that very often this is the area that people forget to think about too much. So we've got Phil, who's going to be sharing his insights on behalf of City Heart. So they run the UK's largest post-national referral service to support victims of modern slavery. And Phil's joined by MD. MD is a law student and community champion who has lived experience of modern day slavery in the UK. So MD is going to be sharing his story and talking about how City Hearts have helped him to recover. Okay, so I guess we're all here today because we recognise the built environment is a high risk sector for worker exploitation and poor employment practices, or in its most extreme form, modern slavery. Why is it such a risk? Where to start? We've got the huge demand for labour. We've got the ongoing and severe skills shortage. I think the latest stats from CITB highlight that we need an extra 266,000 workers by 2026 to meet construction output, UK construction output. We've got indirect employment and self-employment is really common, which exacerbates the risks. And then we've got these really complex supply chains where we have almost a labyrinth of subcontractors working on one site. And it's very difficult to understand who's working for who's employed by who. And then we've got things like the added pressures such as financial penalties that may be there for delays to work, the idea of the rapid churn of workers. And all of these factors, I suppose, increase the risk of businesses ignoring the usual protocols and processes for bringing workers on site, which increases that risk. Okay, so I've stolen this this infographic from CIOB. So this is the exploitation spectrum. So it starts off there at the top with poor health and safety, and then the spectrum kind of works its way around clockwise right through to forced labour, which is the most extreme form, which is modern slavery. So as an industry, I think we do suffer from a reputation associated very often with poor working conditions and poor employment practices. For example, things like bullying, working long hours, overtime sometimes not being paid, discrimination, illegal deductions. These are not uncommon within our sector. And then we've got the well-being issues. I think in 2019, I think it was CIOB did a report that found that 1 in 4 construction workers had considered suicide. So all of these kind of factors and behaviours make workers more vulnerable, and it increases the chances of those more severe forms of labour abuse, which was modern slavery at the most extreme end of the spectrum. So when we're talking about modern slavery, first of all, modern slavery is clearly it's illegal. It's the illegal exploitation of people for personal or commercial gain. And what we need to understand, it's about victims being trapped. Victims are trapped in servitude, not necessarily in chains, trapped in that way, but they are trapped in servitude and completely controlled by exploiters, so much so that they cannot leave. So what I'd like you to do now is let's grab your phones, or if you have a spare browser, and we're going to go to one of our polls. Get you guys getting involved. So if you go to menti.com, and then it will prompt you for a code, which I've highlighted there. And Rosie, if you could pop the code into the chat as well, that would be great. I'm going to change the screens, but don't worry, those details will be on the next one. Okay, so I can see that. So you've got the code at the top, the menti.com at the top of my screen, and the code. That's brilliant. I can see lots of you are joining. That's fantastic. 22 of you so far. So I'll just hang on a minute, give you all a chance to get in there. If anyone's struggling, just pop a note into the Q&A, and Rosie will get back to you. I can see we've got Father Christmas here today and a donut. Okay, just hang on just for a moment or two, and then we'll go to the first question. Right, I'm going to start the question now for you, and if you still haven't got in, the code will still be at the top with the web link. It's a quiz. Answer fast to get more points. What percentage of forced labour worldwide is linked to the construction sector? What do we think? Is it 18%, 7%, 22%, or 10%? Okay, well done to those of you who said 18%. It looked like most of you thought 22%. No, it's actually 18%. So when we're talking about forced labour, it's when people are coerced to work under some kind of threat or some kind of punishment or penalty. Exploiters use various means of controlling their victims, things like threats to family, impersonating figures of authority, controlling people through food and keeping and debt bondage, humiliation, isolation, and so on. Okay, let's move on to the next question then. Question 2. How many victims of modern slavery did the Centre for Social Justice estimate were in the UK in 2020? Is it 13,000, 15,000, 100,000 or 250,000? Okay, well done to those of you. 21 of you got that right. It's 100,000. Clearly, it's a difficult one because it's very much a hidden crime. But the estimates show, I mean, it's huge, 100,000, and those are just estimates. And this is just modern slavery. So if we think about the wider exploitation spectrum and what those numbers may look like in the UK alone, interestingly, this year, there have been just under 4,000 potential victims of modern slavery referred to the Home Office in the first quarter of this year. And a quarter of these were British nationals. I think very often when we talk to main contractors or people within the built environment, there is an assumption that it's always non-UK nationals. That's not always the case when it comes to modern slavery. Okay, and I think I've got one more question for you. Right, let's go. Last question. Operation Cardenas revealed a Romanian organised crime group placed victims into major construction sites, infiltrating how many businesses? At least how many businesses do we think? Is it 15, 7 or 33? Well done, the majority of you got that one right. Sorry, 22 of you got that right. It is 33. So they estimate that they infiltrated 33 companies, which consisted of main contractors, big main contractors, agencies, and also umbrella firm payroll providers. If you haven't heard of Operation Cardenas, there's a report that I'm going to signpost to at the end. It's they estimate that there were between 300 to 500 victims of modern slavery were placed in forced labour onto major commercial and residential projects across London and the southeast over a period of 9 years. Criminals used a range of techniques to circumvent security and avoid suspicion, and also to control their victims. And the victims themselves were trapped in a state of debt and destitution. They just didn't have the means to find work elsewhere. There are lots of lessons learned and insights that you can have a look at in the report, but one of the ways that the exploiters controlled their victims was they were working alongside their victims on building sites, acting as interpreters. So, you know, the exploiters really are smart. They have lots of ways in which to control their victims, and it's something we need to be aware of. I'm sure we'll hear more about that today. Okay, so I think that's. Oh, do we have a leaderboard? Is that going to work? Let's have a look. There we go. Here we go. We've got a leaderboard. So we got Sue at number 1, who's come top, followed by Ronald the hamburger, and then a bunny rabbit at number 3. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So I'm just going to go back to our slides. Oh, that's the wrong one. Bear with me. Here we go. So yes, I suppose my last slide before I hand over is there is clearly a big risk out there. If you're on the call today, or if you hear organisations who say, we don't have any modern slavery on our sites or any labour exploitation, I think it's organisations are showing themselves that their ignorance around understanding the risk. There's a phrase that Marshall's, Chris Harrop at Marshall's uses, which is it's about recognising it will be there somewhere, and it's about finding it and fixing it. And these are just some headlines from recently, just to highlight what we've talked about. So you've got Operation Cardenas there on the top right. The one on the bottom left is an interesting one. It's the Rooney Traveller family. They had lots of victims of modern slavery who were all British nationals who were targeted because they were extremely vulnerable, and they had them working on small kind of small construction jobs. And then you've got, I think it was Construction News had a piece around an undercover journalist went, and it's a video of how they bought slave labour in London. So yes, clearly a huge problem. It's about being aware that it's there and we need to find it and fix it. So, okay, I think that's the last of my slides. Yes, so I'm going to hand over now to Doug to talk about ethical employment in 2022. So Doug is procurement and supply chain lead in risk management at Achilles. So Doug, over to you.
Thanks, EJ, and good morning to you all. I'm going to start off with a couple of polls and then pick up from EJ's last slide as well. So if we can go into our first poll, EJ, thank you. few more seconds, EJ, and we'll just we'll finish it at, if you can finish it around about now. Okay, great. So yeah, top in the top few, we see labour practice, human rights, equality. Climate change is usually number one. Not no surprise there. But it just shows that the importance of what is coming under the social compliance and improvement banner within sustainability and ESG. So if we can move on, EJ, that'd be great. And if you could then go into our next poll and answer what you would consider when you're tendering for work. Right, we'll finish there. Finish there if we can, EJ. So again, just shows that how the sustainability and ESG factors are coming into our focus, into our bidding, and actually how we're going about winning work, not just protecting and developing our supply chains. What I wanted to pick up on now is EJ gave you a lot of cases from the UK around what's been found, what's happening. Modern slavery and ethical employment isn't new to people, but what I wanted to give an overview now is actually what's happening around the world in regards to legislation now that ethical employment challenges and modern slavery is more of a topic that is on everyone's business agendas. Give you an example, the Transparency Act in Norway has just gone live, that requires and looks into greater human rights due diligence checks within their supply chain. And this is relating to certain company sizes into what they're doing, but again goes on a notion around evidence in what is going on within your business and what checks you are carrying out. So really providing evidence behind the policies and statements that people have in place. So that's just come in place within Norway. Germany have a similar act that's coming across human rights and environmental risks. Again, looking at companies demonstrating how they are preventing and fixing areas of risk related to environment and human rights within their supply chains. So again, Germany moving along. The UK saw the Health and Care Act given royal assent earlier this year. This is following around goods for the NHS being tainted by slavery or human trafficking. We've seen amendments to the Modern Slavery Bill come in place, again along the theme of greater evidence and due diligence and being able to report and show what you're doing to eradicate human rights exploitation within your value chain, I'll say. So not just your businesses, your supply chain, your value chain. And a lot of this is coming down to the EU directive that's come out again, which is looking for all organisations to provide greater transparency to what they are doing. So effectively, we are seeing the cases, we're seeing it in the news, and now we are seeing legislation come in across Europe, the US, Canada, and now so it is a part of business, and good that it is that we're seeing that this comes something that people have to comply with to address the challenge. If we can go to the next slide, EJ, that'd be great. I'm going to go into another poll on Amenti. So I just wanted to, these polls are looking at data from Achilles and what do companies have in place in the UK? These are UK companies. Okay, so 70 to 90%, I think it's actually around about 73% of companies have a modern slavery policy or statement in place at the moment, out of nearly 9,000 companies based here in the UK. If you can go to the next Menti, EJ, please. What percentage do you think have a corporate social responsibilities code of conduct? It's at the same number of UK companies, roughly. Okay, so really a lot of companies have codes of conduct in place. If we could move to the next slide, please, EJ. Thank you. So before I move on, what I wanted to highlight is actually people have got policies, got statements, they've got governance within their business, yet we're still seeing issues within industry at the moment. And this is getting to the point, and it reflects to what the legislation is saying, is we might need to go beyond the policy and the statement to eradicate and improve. Okay. So before I move now into giving you some findings around what we've done, and these are all from our 2002 audits, 2022 audits, audits, I should say, going back a long way there. But just to give you a bit of context, the findings that we're about to go through come from two types of audits. One, which some of you may know from previous webinars, is us going where Achilles is going out onto different sites around the UK and across Europe. This is UK data, to interview workers and operatives on site, and we are on site randomly on a random date, and we pick and choose people to interview as we see fit. So that is one type of audit, in the ethical site audit. And then we were also talking through some findings from ethical employment audits, and these are where we are going in directly at the head office to look at their practices in place for addressing ethical employment within their business and within their supply chains. So EJ, if you could just move to the next slide, please. Thank you. This slide, I'm not going to spend too much time on it, because EJ's slide at the start was really good at sort of showing the different areas of ethical employment and modern slavery. These are the sort of things that we are covering within the audit process. And this, an example of health and safety in the site worker interview, maybe around their induction process for health and safety, maybe around their provision of PPE for health and safety, and so on. Working hours, maybe around whether the breaks they're allowed to have, days of work over week, are they allowed to, is pay over time voluntary or not. So they're the type of themes that we have in the interviews, and it's then followed up with in the management systems audit that look at the practices they have in place across these sort of topics. So next slide, please, EJ. So what have we found at a high level? So this is looking at the worker interviews. Okay, so 40% of personnel have not got, 46% of personnel have not got written terms and conditions of employment. Okay, so we're talking in the sort of ethical employment spectrum here, in terms of modern slavery being at the very far end, and poor employment practices being on that spectrum. 31% of personnel that were not presenting the correct right to work documentation. 80% of personnel had not been spoken to about modern slavery, okay, or made awareness around modern slavery. 23% of site workers were charged to go to work or faced non-standard charges. Okay, this is around about 2,000 interviews done in 2022. Okay, so we see the key themes there, and this is then when backed up with when we're going into the management systems audits. 90% of companies had findings raised against their contracting and worker rules of engagement. 75% of companies had findings raised against communication and additional recruitment or employment charges. 83% around right to work verification. 90% around third-party labour wages. And 83% of companies were found to use wage deductions as part of a disciplinary program. Okay, so what we're hearing from workers on site is being validated in some of the management systems audits that we're finding. And whilst a lot of this may not be breaking legislative rules, it is examples of poor employment practices, and it's examples of vulnerability within the labour workforce, within the construction sector. Effectively, these are sort of softer end stuff that can lead them into exploitation. EJ, if you could just pop onto the next slide, please. So one sort of things often companies go, how do we even start? How do we start addressing our employment practices within our value chain? And much like EJ said at the start, it's about having a look. And people that say they haven't got issues aren't looking. Okay, in short. So what can you do to start understanding where you are? So step one, if you're looking at your supply chain and what they have, so sort of some of the data I used at the beginning, they're around percentage of modern slavery statements and so on. You can use your pre-qualification process to understand what your supply chain have and don't have, reviewing that data. Or if you're thinking about your own business, you may actually want to review what your business is putting into bids to say that you're doing around addressing ethical employment within your business and within your supply chain. So the first step is just having an understanding of where you're at as a business and where your supply chain may be at as well. Next step we suggest is engaging your workforce. Okay, that may be engaging the workforce of your supply chain in on site, for example. It may be talking to your own staff and people that are out working on site. Maybe talking directly to some of the subcontractors and supply chain you use. This should give you an idea about what the experience is at the worker level. And even your colleagues level about what they are going through. And then that should give you an idea about potentially where you need to have a further look. And this is when you then go into finding the facts. So this is where you may dig deeper, whether you're going to visit a manufacturer or a subcontractor, or maybe you need internally, you want to look at a certain division of your own business. So it really is then going in to find out, you've been given identified risk, you need to find out what's fact. And then you can start to build and execute your enablement plan. So this may be then training, it may be getting exec sponsors involved for doing certain improvement activities, but ultimately it will give you areas to focus and you can build a plan around this within there. And as this goes around, it's all about capturing data at the end of the day. If you are able to show where you started, where you are once you've looked, and where you are once you've actually conducted training, the whole cycle will repeat itself, and you'll be able to demonstrate what you are doing and how you are driving improvement within your business and within your value chain. Next slide, please, EJ. And my final poll, I believe. Nearly 8,000 UK companies, what percentage of their supply chain audit against CSR practices, that should say? Okay. So again, we are doing quite a lot in this space, but maybe we need to dig a little bit deeper into what's actually going on. And that's kind of the theme that I want to bring and finish my presentation on. So thank you, EJ, and thank you for listening. I see there's a few Q&As, so I will pick these up if any are relating to myself.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Doug. Thank you for those insights. It kind of paints a pretty harsh yet, I suppose, realistic picture of what's really happening on our sites, across our supply chain, and things are really changing very quickly, aren't they? From a legislative context, I think it's difficult to kind of keep up to speed with what's happening, but due diligence really is a hot topic, and it's not going anywhere. So thank you for those practical tips, and building on those now, specifically looking around worker engagement. Charlotte, I'm going to hand over to you to talk about Sky's experience on this.
Thank you very much, EJ. It's lovely to be here, part of this discussion today, and thanks, Doug. I learned some things there. why Sky? Why are we here? We are not a construction company. I work for Sky and have done for 6 years now, and I'm really lucky to be able to hold a role of human rights lead. So I get to focus just on human rights and embedding respect for human rights throughout Sky's value chain and where we influence. And that role is really on looking at implementing the guiding principles on business and human rights, meeting the growing legislation and getting beyond it, but also as a media company and as a business that has a kind of real opportunity to use its voice, we aim to champion respect for human rights throughout what we do. Our impacts on people's rights throughout our value chain and our work on this has really started, and we have the kind of really strong long-term program in electronics manufacturing as a provider of set-top boxes and routers and satellite dishes and other electronic equipment. We also make TV content, which obviously impacts on people's rights in the making of that. We broadcast sport and news. We have broad supply chains, including things like branded merchandise and clothing, and working with businesses. And obviously we also have big operations. We have 34,000 people. We have facilities, services to support those. And as of 3 years ago, we've had 2 quite major construction projects on behalf of Sky. The first one, this building you can see now on screen, is the Sky Innovation Centre, which is on our West London campus. And back in 2018, when we were thinking about this, the development of the buildings was the first kind of big construction project that we'd had since the UK Modern Slavery Act and the kind of evolution of our programme to respect human rights. And we knew that in time there was likely to be a bigger scale construction project, which EJ you've now moved on to, which is the Sky Studios Elstree project, which we've now kind of coming towards completion of. So we've had kind of 2, one slightly smaller earlier project with the Innovation Centre, and then this kind of larger scale project with the Elstree Studios in North London. And we really aimed to look at what were the risks of labour exploitation in this industry, what were the growing risks, what was our exposure to these risks through these projects, and how could we jointly with the partners that we're working with on these projects understand any challenges in sort of implementing good practice through this, and really have sought to kind of to do that throughout these projects. And so I'm very, sitting here as Sky, but I'm one of many partners that have been involved in kind of the success of these 2 projects. So I'm really interested, if we go on to my first poll, EJ, if you were a client or a construction company new to this and new to the industry, where would you? I don't think this is our one. That's it. Where would you start if you were looking to address the risks of labour exploitation? What would you start with to try and kind of build your understanding, to develop a project where you're the client, you're not necessarily in kind of full control, but you have a lot of influence over a project? And this is a word cloud. I'm not sure whether it's happening at the moment, but if it is, EJ, you have to give me a nod. Yeah. Please stick in your word that kind of first springs to mind. What will be kind of a really good starting point for this? Have we got enough in to, oh, there we go, starting to come in. The sustainability score, fantastic. Checks on the labour force. A policy, yes, brilliant. What information contractors are sharing on their public websites, what are the supply chains, talking to people, great idea. Networking, education, lots of references to the supply chain sustainability school, and looking at worker pay, brilliant. There are lots of great ideas for starting points here. I think did quite, sorry, it keeps changing, keeps seeing new things, but I think we did a number of these things. We really looked to pull in kind of, lots of different sources. We were new to the industry, it's not we're not our area of expertise. So we looked to kind of pull in research that was happening, worked with CIOB, with Stronger Together, with others to try and understand the insights of kind of what was coming through and how we might best play a role at going beyond the sort of minimum standards of due diligence. So if we go on down to the next slide, EJ, what we started to develop with these, with the sort of insights that we were building and looking at some of the companies within our tender process, and working with them. And what we started was with discussions and requirements that we were setting kind of throughout the tender process. And we realized quite quickly that we felt that what we were aiming to do was something that was really quite resilient and kind of understanding of changes to the project or kind of external developments that were happening. We started the project and quickly the start of the pandemic happened, so we needed to remain kind of very actively involved in jointly kind of driving this work to build this understanding and mitigate the risks and put in place better protections. And so we jointly drafted a set of principles with the idea of then kind of iterating these, but generally kind of coming back to these whenever there was a slight change or whenever there was a concern that was raised, and really make sure that we were kind of exemplifying these through the work that we're doing. So the first very much being that we were thinking about and actually maybe I should change this now. I was thinking about our discussion last week, but we really wanted to think about those that were potentially going to be impacted. So putting people at the centre, and particularly the most vulnerable. Then we wanted to look at really facilitating a kind of a safe space for sharing concerns, for asking the questions that you're really just not quite sure about, and therefore felt that we needed to make it clear that this was kind of a blame-free environment for those kind of partners working as part of this project, so that they could raise anything that they were worried about, because then we could do something about it. We also looked to kind of really engender a learning focus throughout, so continually looking at what we were doing, looking back, changing things, testing things, ensuring that Sky was there to not just set a set of requirements, but that jointly we were learning from it. And then, as probably this is coming to all of this, but it needed to be collaborative, sharing, transparency, supportive of each other. So we developed these, we kind of held them together, and we have kind of kept them coming back to them through the project. And an example of this is in my kind of brought into my next question, which I'm probably skipping forward a little bit, but I thought we'll do it early on in the session just to keep you awake, is around what you do if there was a concern raised about possible labour exploitation. So some of these conversations after we'd done some training was immediately, of course, into so what do you do with that information? We had the standard, calling the Modern Slavery Helpline, the GLAA are available, but sometimes if we go to the poll, EJ, and then we can
2 seconds.
Lovely. And we started thinking about, what could a really good response look like, and what could something that potentially had some kind of negative impacts mean. So I think we've got that going on. Lovely. So lots of people have a response protocol in place. That is brilliant to see, and I think that I'm really interested in how maybe we can have a bit of discussion about it later on, but how that came about, and also how your response protocol and processes around that are changing. And that's something that we kind of had set about this sort of response protocol, but we found that we needed quite a lot of evolution of that, and really getting to grips with training people to be able to respond in the moment in a way that wouldn't put potential victims at greater risk. So that's something that came through quite strongly. If we skip on to the next slide, we've got lots of I think we can probably come back to that in discussion, but if we go on to the next one there, just a quick overview of some of the things that the process that we've kind of built into the sort of full project process across both the Innovation Centre and Elstree. Obviously kind of mapping of suppliers and understanding of contractors. Initially that was a sort of list of about 40 suppliers for the smaller project, and from those we kind of risk ranked them for those that we felt needed to initially kind of engage in the training. We did manage to kind of widen that out to kind of all suppliers working on the project, or tailoring audits to where the risk was greatest and also where we had greatest leverage, of course, and really looking at all of our business as usual activities and building into those processes opportunities to support people with empowering them to raise concerns or build in kind of good practice and good opportunities for discussion around it. We also had a really strong kind of drive to share with the industry, as we're doing now, as we've done as part of the Stronger Together steering group and others, to make sure, because we're not a construction company, but we want to share what we learn. One of the things in the middle there that I didn't mention was around worker engagement, and we'll come back to that a little bit, as EJ said. If we go on to the next slide, EJ, what we have looked to do kind of throughout the training, the audits, some of our worker engagement processes, is really continually seeking feedback for us and for our main contractors, ISG and BAM, have been seeking it to engage and support their programs, and we had some really good really kind of thoughtful responses from subcontractors, from participants in the training and the audits, to look at kind of how kind of shift in kind of view and perspective and kind of consideration for some of these issues, which I think has have made a big difference to the project. If we go on to the next slide. What we found then, in starting to get some of this feedback from suppliers, is that actually what we really needed to get to was some kind of was engagement with workers. Workers are most likely to see something that could be a potential concern, to be looking out for each other. And we recognised that the sort of management systems level due diligence was only going to take us so far, and really needed to be complemented with as much insight from workers as possible. And obviously the labour shortages and the time pressures in construction, we know kind of incentivise some of this kind of quick decision making, possibly around previously unknown labour providers and subcontractors, sometimes without the time for detailed checks. And if what we really needed to do was kind of put our attention to improving the experience for workers and therefore engaging them directly. So if we go on to the next slide, I'll just show you how we did some of that. Set our intentions to listen to workers through all of these opportunities. So through inductions, through monthly stand downs, which we focused on initially what we called modern slavery, but what we later kind of talked more about is your rights, or building minimum standards. We obviously had increased the number of on-site materials that were available. We needed to seek out that kind of direct engagement opportunity. So the site managers were kind of really key to that. We had quite an ongoing program of informal worker interviews, as well as formal worker interviews through the audits, and introduced the Safeguard hotline. And then we also did some of these supervisor sessions, which had really helped us to kind of piece together some of what we were hearing from the worker surveys with what supervisors were kind of telling us were some of their barriers. So if we go on to the next slide, we obviously, as you can imagine, have in some of these different touch points faced different challenges. Terminology, I've used the phrase language, but initially terminology in the language of modern slavery was found to be really kind of confronting, and it didn't necessarily feel relevant to workers, and people didn't necessarily feel like they wanted to, speak up about that. And so we kind of looked at that. The kind of language barriers themselves have been kind of said again and again, the kind of the number one difficulty, and so translation facilities being really important. And of course, there being, these kind of insufficient opportunities really to kind of build up the trust and support needed to enable people to feel comfortable to speak up. So there was reported kind of unwillingness to talk to management or black hats. So if we had people saying that if they see someone arriving in a clean new set of PPE who looks like management, they get out of the way as soon as possible. And then the pressures of work, and this came through, and it was the biggest learning I think for us as an organisation is, it's not that people are turning a blind eye. It's often that the issue is overlooked because of time pressures and deadlines, and that is, there's a role for all of us in the industry in that. What we also found sometimes was that some of the sort of perception of the traditional models of engagement can be quite extractive. So, you worker, give me lots of information about your experience, but what am I getting back for it as somebody? Is this actually going to change anything for me? Am I going to feel like I'm in a better environment as a result of this? And so that was something we really needed to look at. So sorry, I'm conscious I'm probably going on over time, getting close to it anyway. I've got a slide or two left. So if we go on to the next one. Our lessons learned through the worker engagement, some of which I've touched on, but from a kind of terminology perspective, what we moved towards was using terminology like labour exploitation, labour rights, or your rights is much more accessible, and it might enable those experiencing exploitative practices who might not characterise themselves in this position, but might help them to recognise and flag any issues. We also then found that, we needed to show that people were being listened to and that it was being acted upon. So feedback loops. ISG used a system of boards called You Said, We Did to provide feedback to workers about the improvements made to working conditions as a result of the issues that they were raised. And we started with, relatively small take up of kind of phone surveys, worker-based phone surveys. And the participation in those surveys, once we started putting a few things on those You Said, We Did boards, went right up. And they helped, the team demonstrate the progress and impact to wider Sky stakeholders who were, on and off the site all the time as well. So there was, again, another way to facilitate collaboration. The on-site leaders and really supporting people there on site to know what to do and really invest in them and give them time to do this was really important, because they are best placed to build respect and rapport with workers who might feel better able to raise concerns as a result and spot the issues. And obviously going through the pandemic, we found that there was less visibility from Sky and less ongoing kind of interaction on the site, but the site manager developed on their own a kind of in-depth briefing to all workers in small groups to just see how they were doing, what could be improved, if anyone had any concerns about family or their own lives that the company could support. And it really helped build rapport and then enabled workers to raise any kind of labour rights related concerns off the back of it. Languages, obviously, translation facilities are growing. We know that they're available, but just making sure that those are always there and understanding who is on your site and therefore what languages are needed, I think is really important. Clear Voice is a great facility to support with that. Just the industry challenges that have been raised, as I mentioned before, I think this kind of consideration of the decisions that are being made sort of further up the supply chain and the potential impacts they have, and asking first before making the decision. So presenting in the business case, actually, if we make this change on this material or this kind of project timeline, these are some of the potential concerns that could come out of that, and have people having that in mind was really important. And then just skipping to the end, and I think probably the most important was this kind of prioritising worker welfare really as early as possible in the project, because and throughout, it was the only way for us to enable that those sort of improvements in standards to be made. You know, we've set the tone. This, you know, welfare provision needed to be a prerequisite for the partnership, for the project, and we kind of really considered that throughout. And then if we just go on to my last slide, really, I think it's been really important for us as collaborative project teams on the Innovation Centre and now on Elstree to have some success criteria throughout to try and measure some of our implementations and interventions, especially as the project changed and we pivoted a bit often. So workers knowing their rights being a really, you know, useful way to measure, and certainly a measurable, you know, objective, and knowing how to raise concerns about themselves and others. And then we've been looking at our own kind of learning as well, and as, you know, contractors as well as a client, us, you know, kind of reviewing and kind of going out with kind of discussions every few months about how do we respond differently to when this happens, you know, to when we set this up, and then that we are, you know, continuing to identify and address potential risks and put in place, you know, the right tools to kind of address those. We've seen a lot of improvements as a result of it, with people rolling out training across all of their, you know, subcontractors, with additional checks being made on labour and recruitment agencies, and people engaging subcontractors specifically in one-to-one sessions on labour practices, ways, you know, increasing ways for all workers to raise concerns, catalysing completely fundamental changes to business models as a way of employing workers in different ways, and then also, you know, increasing due diligence approaches, particularly on new labour and recruitment agencies, and kind of following up on references and carrying out spot checks as improvements that have been made. So we published our initial learnings, if we go to the last slide, through this case study on Sky Innovation Centre, which we've done some kind of webinars on before, and we are going to be doing the same with our Elstree project in the near future. Thanks, EJ.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte. Thank you so much. It's really inspiring to hear a client who really is driving this and leading and embedding this in the way they do business. So thank you very much, and great to get those really practical insights as well. A reminder, we'll be sharing the slides, we'll be sharing the recording, so I'm sure there'll be lots of people taking those on board, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions later on. So okay, thank you, Charlotte. So I'm going to hand over now to yes, I'm going to hand over to Maria and Luciana. So Maria is Head of Sustainability at Multiplex, and Luciana is Senior Social Value and Community Manager. So Luciana and Maria, over to you.
Thank you, EJ. I'm Maria, Head of Sustainability of Multiplex. As EJ said, Multiplex, we are a global construction company operating in Australia, the Middle East, Canada, and the UK. And here in the UK, we mostly work around London and Scotland. I'll be giving you an introduction to our ethical labour management system and our overarching procedures, strategy, etc. And then Luciana will go into more detail about what we actually do in our sites. Can we go to the next slide, please? So how did we get here? As I mentioned, we are a global construction company, so particularly from the Middle East, we've taken lots of lessons learned in the ethical treatment of labour, in everything that has to do with health, safety, well-being, socioeconomic impact. We've been mostly in the UK working on this space from 2017, when we had our first mental health first aiders trained. In 2018, we became founding members of Building Responsibly, and we joined Social Value UK. I'm sure lots of you will be familiar with the Building Responsibly principles that we helped co-drafting. 2019, we launched our ethical labour management system that I'll go into a little bit more detail shortly. We also became founding partners of Stronger Together, where we are there with Sky and know Charlotte very well from there. We are very active collaborating with the Belgrade Building Council, and one of those examples is their health and well-being framework and their Better Places for People partnerships, which we support. 2020, we launched One Life, One Team, which is our behavioral management system from the health and safety, but also with an ethical labor side to it. And then last year was quite big for us because we launched our 1 Decade to Act, which is our decarbonization roadmap, and just to make sure that we, as things change, to make sure we achieve that net zero by 2050, we take into account that the people side. We also launch our social equity strategy, Leave No One Behind. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I've mentioned our strategy a couple of times, and where did we get inspiration from? So probably some of you have seen this donut before. So Kate Raworth, an economist from Oxford, challenged our traditional linear economic models, and she came up with this donut. So what does this represent? If we look into the inner circle where it says social foundation, everything that falls within that represents the bare minimum that every single individual needs to have all their rights, human rights, guaranteed. So we have things there like water, energy, health, education, gender equality, etc. If we look at the bigger white circle, we have ecological ceilings. So that is that represents the limit of everything that we can extract out of the earth. So it's using all the resources that the world provides us in a sustainable manner. If we go beyond that circle, that is overshooting. So you probably have all seen in the news last week that we had already used all the resources for this year with Earth Overshoot Day. So everything that falls outside that white circle is, for example, climate change, air pollution, etc. In between the social foundation and the ecological ceiling, that is the safe and just space for humanity. So that is living a sustainable life and having everyone's rights guaranteed. Can we go to the next slide, please? And so what does that represent for us at Multiplex? At the center of everything that we do is our business purpose to construct a better future. And then we have two circles there. The outside one is our environmental ecological ceiling interpretation. So everything that has to do with our environmental strategy. And I'm going to focus on the inner one, which is our social equity strategy, Leave No One Behind. So we have 4 pillars there: health, safety, and well-being, diversity, inclusion, and respect, socioeconomic value, and respecting communities. And everything that we do for the ethical management of labor falls under pillar 3, socioeconomic value. Can we go into the next slide, please? So just starting here, as I said, it aligns with our decarbonization roadmap in terms of what we are going to be doing this decade to ensure that just transition as we move towards a decarbonized industry. And these are the targets that we have set for ourselves in terms of ethical treatment of labor. So you can see there, for example, for this year, all of our new supply chain partners are going to be screened and audited against our ethical labor principles. We have come with 10 principles that include living conditions, working payments, and a few other things. And we include all that within our contractor documentation for our supply chain partners. The key to deliver on the ethical treatment of labor is collaboration. So we always keep an eye out for technical solutions that are out there in terms of how we can engage with our supply chain. And then Luciana will touch on how we monitor and report things on ethical labor. And one of those things is churn rate. For 2025-2030, we go beyond. We're looking like our audits, payments for real living wage, going, as EJ mentioned at the beginning, we have a very complex supply chain, so it's going beyond that tier 1 and start looking farther down. Can we go to the next slide, please? Earlier this year, we launched our ESG supply chain charter, environmental, social, governance supply chain charter. So what we have done there is summarizing everything that we expect our supply chain to work with us on to make sure that we can deliver on our strategies. As I mentioned, collaboration is key to make sure, for example, the ethical management of labor. And what I've added in there is an extract of that particular section in our ESG supply chain charter, where it details what we are going to be asking our supply chain for. This becomes, it's a requirement for our supply chain to acknowledge acknowledge this supply chain charter and to accept that they are going to be working with us on those things. The supply chain charter is available online and also in our profile in the Supply Chain Sustainability School website. Next slide, please. I mentioned, yeah, I was going to say, you can click a couple of times. I mentioned at the beginning that in 2009 we launched, we launched our ethical labor management system. So in the Middle East, we had a more mature a system to manage ethical labor, just because it was more mature and relevant at the time in there, and probably before the modern slavery legislation came in, probably most people were, as EJ mentioned at the beginning, saying like, no, we don't have any issues, etc. And that is just not correct. So we developed a series of procedures, forms, and manuals that cover things like how we are reporting on ethical labor and what we include in that reporting. So this forms parts of our monthly project reviews, where the project teams look into like what is happening on the sites, and that, for example, include the outcomes of ethical labor interview questions. So we've partnered with Achilles to do site engagement audits, but also the social value and community team does a number of interviews a month just to engage with the people working on site and finding out if there are any areas of concerns. We have a subcontractor social value and ethical labor requirements form that details what we ask them in terms of procedures, evidence, etc., for how they manage their payment, their recruitment, agencies they work with, etc. In partnership with Stronger Together, we developed a site-level escalation flowchart. So this is for everyone who works on site and not just for the social value and community team to know what to do if they suspect that everyone is a victim of modern slavery. So there is a series of things that we look out for, and then there is very clear detailed steps on what to do to manage that situation. Of course, we have an ethical labor and modern slavery policy. We've recently published our modern slavery and human trafficking transparency statement, and the key for this is continual improvement. The thing like events for this and collaboration helps us to learn from everything that we do. So we've just gone through a review of our ethical labor management system to make sure that it's still fit for purpose and that we can continue learning, making sure that everyone who works on our sites is being looked after. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now I'll pass it over to my colleague Luciana, who will go into a little bit more detail about what this actually means inside. Thank you.
So good morning, everyone. I'm Luciana Campos. I'm the Senior Social Value Manager for Multiplex. And as Maria said, I'm going to talk to you all about more the day-to-day activities on the site, how we're trying to eradicate, modern slavery. So just to start on this slide here, we've got our, dashboard about ethical labor. I'm not going to really explain, all the graphs and the lines there, but just so you understand how we get to this system inside, is that every worker, every operative that come to, Multiplex projects, basically, they have to be registered into data scope, a system that Multiplex uses. So before they come to site, they also have online induction. And once they attend this induction on site, their passports, whether UK, EU, or any other passports, work visas, and birth certificates, they are checked, they are screened for, just so we kind of spot any kind of fake documents. And this is all registered into info exchange. So the data from data scope and this information about their IDs, which is screened by PPAC system, all fed into info exchange. So info exchange, it's again another system that we have, that all findings that we have on site for health and safety, well-being, modern slavery are all registered into the system. And then the system then produces these graphs that you can see in your screen, which is Power BI, connected into info exchange, into data scope as well, and they display all this data into charts and graphs to Multiplex teams, as you can see here in this screenshot. This is great for us, as a tool to share, for example, with our clients, and then show them, for example, what we are screening and the work that we are doing in our projects. EJ, if you don't mind jumping to the next slide, please, which is about the labor churn rate. So this slide that you have there, this screenshot, is basically an overall early churn rate average. You see that from 2019 to 2021. As you can see here on March 2020, you can imagine why we have this peak of 40% of labor churn. That was the beginning, of course, the COVID pandemic. Basically, this labor churn report is produced on a monthly basis. Usually for every project, we have this labor churn, and then every single month we are screening, we are tracking every single supplier we have on site. I haven't added here another screenshot about that, but it actually should be helpful. I'm happy to update this slide before this is shared with all of you. So for every single contractor in our project, we have a requirement that it's 10% as a maximum for labor churn in every single multiplex project. For every single contractor, regardless of their size or turnover, is a maximum of 10% of labor churn. So I, myself and my other colleagues on the social value team, on a monthly basis, we are tracking this percentage of churn. We are working with our supply chain .
I think we have lost Luciana there. Let's see if she comes back. I'll step in. Luciana, are you back?
Hello, yes, I'm back. Sorry, what happened?
No problem.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yeah, we can. We just lost you for a few seconds there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I think we can't hear you again, Luciana. I don't know, Maria, maybe if you could jump in.
Yeah,
that would be.
I know Luciana is on site today, so they may be having a few issues. We'll see if she can come back. Well, I think she's covered everything on the churn rate. So if we can go to the next slide, please. At least her image has frozen in a very smiley way. It's like sometimes this is quite awkward. Yeah, I think I mentioned at the beginning that we were trialing different solutions. So last year we engaged with Worker Feedback Club to pilot their initiative. So they came to 3 of our sites between October and November 2021, and they spoke to 59 people. They did a mix of in-person interviews and then via mobile app. So what they wanted to find out was if there was any difference in how people responded and the level of information that they gave, if it was an in-person or anonymous via an app. So this focused actually on dry lining companies. So they spoke, 73% of those were from dry liners. And across the 3 sites, some of the key areas that they identified was there was pay problems. So overtime, either them being challenged on their overtime, like, oh no, you didn't need to work those hours, or you didn't work these hours, etc. Breaks, not being paid, well-being. So they said that we as business were doing a lot in terms of mental health first aid, but that it was then it was not necessarily being cascaded down to the workers, and that they would have felt more comfortable talking to someone, for example, that they know more than one of the multiplex managers, and then also that they were receiving comments like, just get your work done. So that completely contradicted everything else that we were saying in terms of mental health first aid. And then another thing was in terms of training. So they were saying that they were facing barriers to get training. So either they couldn't see a path for career progression, financial challenges because they were not being supported by the employer for the training, etc. A few other things that came up were people considering if, particularly for those who were not from the UK, if staying in the country was worth it with increasing living costs, etc. It's like for those who were sending money home, they were considering this, which very much links to what Luciana was covering in her Churn slide of why we monitor, like why do people leave our projects. Can we please go ahead, EJ?
Yeah.
Oh, Luciana, are you back?
Yeah.
Going.
If you want, I can continue, of course. Up to you, Maria.
No, go.
So basically, you know, across those, it's all good. Can you all hear me now?
Yes, it's good.
Thank you. All right. So yeah, as Maria explained about the themes across the site, pay problems, well-being in context, and then training blockers. Just wanted to add something here about the well-being context is that some of our multiplex sites, they are now offering the mental health first aiders to the operatives, because as Maria said, you know, the workers were not feeling, you know, comfortable to, of course, approach the site supervisors of multiplex, you know, multiplex health and safety managers and etc. So we decided to actually invest this in our supply chain. So basically all operatives on a monthly basis, we offer them this opportunity to do the mental health first aiders. So going to the context for the themes about, you know, the long hours, poor English language skills. For example, some of them think that they might not be able to find another job because of that, or they were even thinking as part of the training blockers is that their English was not good enough to do any kind of training and then progress in their careers. No employment protections, especially for the agency workers, not having like a job security. And as Maria mentioned before about pay problems, you know, some workers are planning to return to home because they're all very much aware of, you know, the rising cost of inflations here in the UK, and they not see UK now, especially London, not financially worth it because a lot of them send their monies back home. And I've been hearing this on a weekly basis from our supply chain that they are really struggling to recruit people, you know, to replace the ones that have already gone back to their countries, and most of them are, I would say, in a multiplex projects, they are Eastern Europeans. If we go to the next slide, EJ, please. Thank you. So this slide is about ethical labor audits that we carry out twice a year with a third-party company in all our sites, which is Ecological that you heard from them early this morning. So as part of these ethical labor audits, basically about 410 operatives were interviewed across 8 of our sites in London, and the main key findings from this particular audit that we carried out earlier this year, it's a few issues in terms of the non-written.
I think I may have to step in again. So as Luciana was mentioned, yeah, we've found, at the beginning we saw like those industry trends, so pretty much aligned with that in terms of our findings. So people who don't have written terms of conditions of employment, so they are not aware of like how well they did not acknowledge having anything written that details how much they are going to get paid, working hours, etc. Right to work documentation, so people not providing like those people providing documents that are not necessarily the right form to prove right to work, so driving licenses, CS cards, documents on their phones, etc. They raised a lack of awareness on modern slavery, so that was something for us to review. So we've increased posters and communications that we have around the sites. And I saw a question in the chat. We have been using the Stronger Together material for that, which has information in different languages. And also we've reviewed our induction materials. So the first step, how people go through when they come to site, and the information that we provide in terms of ethical labor. Payment, very similar to what we mentioned in the previous slide. So minimum wage, London living wage, for example, overtime, so people not getting paid overtime, or deductions not being very clear on where those deductions come from, or actually having deductions that are a bit too high. And then in working hours, we had some people who said like they didn't feel overtime was voluntary, working 7 days a week, etc. So a few things in there that we are currently addressing. So how are we doing this? We've drafted a letter detailing all those findings that we got in the Achilles reports for each one of our subcontractors, and we have asked them to show us how they are managing that for their workers and their own supply chain. We see this as we are not accusing them of not being able to manage their workers, but more like a collaboration and wanting to find more and working together to improve our management systems to make sure that we address all these findings. Where we are not satisfied with the information that our subcontractors are providing, we will be asking them to go through a labor practice audit, so that it looks more in depth by a third party into like their own management systems and their own procedures in place. And then as a result of all of these, and as I mentioned earlier, once a year we review our ethical labor management system to make sure that for those particular issues where we find areas of concern, we have our documents, our procedures in place to address those. Okay. Yeah, and that was our last slide. Sorry about the issues with Luciana. Some of the information that we've both mentioned is available online, the social equity strategy, our ESG supply chain charter, but more than happy to give you any more information. So thank you.
Thanks, Luciana and Maria. It wouldn't be an event if some of you didn't experience technical difficulties, so glad it wasn't me. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing everything that you've been doing and for being so transparent as well about the findings. And yes, as Maria said, it's these common themes that keep coming up again and again, which echo back to what we heard from Doug and in relation to their findings, and to Charlotte when she talked about findings from Sky, things around pay, well-being, hours, language, lack of awareness around modern slavery. Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to hand over now to Phil, who's Head of Development at City Hearts, and MD, who's a survivor of modern day slavery in the UK. And then when they finish, we'll have time for some Q&A. So Phil and MD, over to you.
Hey, great. Thanks. So good to be here. Thanks for the invite. And I've blurred my background because every time I'm on a call with MD, he's got this amazing like wall of fame behind him, where, I mean, MD is an incredible person, really active in the community and makes such a big difference in so many people's lives. And that's what his wall is behind him. So that's why I've blurred my wall, because it's not as impressive. So I'll start by giving a brief sort of overview and some thoughts on City Hearts and what we do, some of the projects that we do around the remedy space. And if you want to pick up on any of that, just put something in the Q&A. But I've just started with this. It's a screenshot of one of the pages on our website. And it's all about the stories of the people that we support. And I think one of the things that gets me out of bed every morning, other than to feed my dog and my children and give my wife a strong cup of coffee, which are all very important motivators, but is to see people's lives fully restored. And I've worked with victims of modern slavery for over 10 years now, in safe house environments and in community, and have sat alongside many people like MD and listened to the horrific stories of how they've been exploited and their experiences. And I have worked predominantly with labour exploitation over the years and been involved in numerous kind of research projects around this as well. But one of the most important things for me is the voice of the people that we support, and that their voice would be heard, and they would have the opportunity to input into things like government policy or into businesses such as you guys on the call today, to have that opportunity to have that dialogue and to input into positive change. And many of the survivors that we work with, we've worked with for many years now, and beyond their exploitation, where that is no longer a defining factor in their lives, but they are turning that pain and that horrific experience into something that's purpose driven, and that is beginning to input and change other people's lives. And some of the stories that you see here just headlined, and MD's on there as well at the bottom right, are just a few of the stories that we capture of those lives that we have had the honor of walking alongside and having some part in bringing that restoration to them. So we go to the next slide. So just a few kind of figures around City Hearts, and if you want to hear any more stories, or you can subscribe to our mailing list, which is just there, which is a great way to hear about the impact of what we're doing and get that survivor voice into your inbox. So we've supported in excess now 7,000 survivors in the last 10 years across the whole of the UK, predominantly in the north, through a safe house network, and as I said, in community and outreach, so those that live in different accommodation settings, perhaps asylum seekers or homeless. So we're accommodation and community. We're currently supporting 1,000 individuals right now, and this is men, women, and families across the board. And we kind of pride ourselves on helping lots of people, but our ethos is always about the person that's in front of us, helping that one person. So that's why the number 1 is at the bottom there, because these are, it's such a privilege to be able to support so many people. But from my experience and the culture that carries through City Hearts is that it's about that one person that's in front of us and supporting that person with what they're feeling and what their need is right now. And I'm just really passionate about creating new ways of supporting people and helping people. And one of the programs that we've developed is a long-term support program. This really fits into that remediation piece where survivors are supported on their journey, empowered to reach their future. Many have come across on false promises, as we know, and their situation has not turned out to be what they thought it was going to be. In many cases, really horrifically not that situation. And so we loved creating programs that support people along their long-term journey. The 82% figure there is a resilience figure for our integration support program, which I'll talk a bit more about in a minute, where 82% of people who go through this program are that's the 82% more resilient to being re-exploited or re-trafficked, and they go on to live full lives. So if we go to the next slide. So this is a tuna sandwich. So this is really interesting because one of the programs that we created is called Bright Future, which some of you may have heard about, but it started over a tuna sandwich, which is why the tuna sandwich is there, with a man who many of you will be familiar with through Stronger Together, David Camp. And I remember when I was running a male safe house, and every day the men that we were supporting would come into the office and they would say, I really need a job because I need to support my family and I need to get back into work. And they were rightly so driven by this desire to get into work, but I was looking at them thinking, well, there's an awful lot of kind of other needs that need sorting. There's alcohol issues here, there's mental health issues here, there's English that needs to be at a higher standard, and there's all these vulnerabilities that were exploited, and the reason why they ended up in modern slavery, and they needed to be addressed. And I wanted to help them with them, but they wouldn't engage or couldn't engage around those because there was this drive to get to work. Even when people had the right to work and ready to work, and they entered into the benefit system or the job seeking system, so many barriers there around confidence and self-esteem, especially for men. Going to interviews and being that being a really unfamiliar environment for them, and no matter how much coaching you go through, when you get rejected for that, that was often a trigger and sent them backwards. And so I just got so frustrated. I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if there was a way that we could just give people jobs? And then I just thought, well, who has jobs? Who has jobs? And businesses have jobs. And so I started going to networking meetings like this and just kind of standing up at the end or when we were in person predominantly, and just saying, does anybody want to help survivors accelerate and fast track back into employment? And that was really the beginning of Bright Future, when David came up to me and said, I can't help you, which is not a great way to start a conversation, but he said, I know someone who might be able to help you, and put me in contact with Aisha from the co-op, and we began a pilot, which is now Bright Future. And Bright Future, and if you go to the next slide, is now it's its own independent cooperative. So it's Bright Future Cooperative Limited, and it's made up of members who are businesses, and they pay a membership fee to be part of the co-op. And then it's made up of all of the large national charities that support survivors, and those charities refer candidates into the system. The system then matches those candidates against job vacancy positions in businesses across the country. And here's just a handful of some of the businesses that are involved in providing survivors with work placements, 4-week work placements, which lead to a guaranteed permanent position, and therefore giving them a pathway, a defined pathway, not work experience, but a pathway into permanent employment. So we go to the next slide. And here is kind of the situation right now. And so we have 43 survivors across the country that are being matched to positions. And you can see there the map, the number of survivors in those different areas. And this is a challenge. I guess one of the challenges for Bright Future is finding businesses who want to help survivors recover and want to help them get back into work. Many, and I'm sure we've heard it today, there's the fear and the risk associated with modern slavery and finding people who are being exploited. But then what happens to them after that, and how do we help them to understand what's happened to them, and then recover and move forward and get back into good employment that is right and good? And how can we do that as quickly as possible for that individual? And Bright Future does that, charities wrap the support around the survivor, and then businesses offer what businesses can offer, which is that supported work environment and getting people into those jobs. And so if you have sites in any of these areas, there could be a conversation there about helping a survivor get back into employment, because we have 43 people in those areas waiting for jobs. Okay, next slide, please. And again, in those areas, this is just a bit more of a breakdown of the areas and what sort of jobs survivors are looking for. Again, these slides will be circulated, so you can look at these, and it may just be that you are in that area, you have a warehouse and or a construction site that you can help survivors to get back into employment. Okay, next slide, please. If we just go back to the previous slide for a second, and we'll go to that in a sec. So we'll leave it up. I want to bring MD in just quickly to sort of just interview him, ask him a couple of questions, and allow him to speak and share what he wants to share, really. But first, MD, I've mentioned a few things. You were given a bit of an introduction. You're studying law, but just tell us a little bit about what are you doing now, and what sort of things are you involved with in and around your life?
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. And thanks, Phil, for your nice introduction. Just to ensure that I will be happy to blur my background from next time, just to see yours, because you always hide it. So I just want to see it next time. So I'll keep that on my mind. Just to begin with, my name is MD Mominul Hamid. I was a victim of slavery and trafficking in the UK. So my exploitation happened in the UK. Yeah, what is about me? You possibly haven't met any survivors or victim of slavery and trafficking yet. So just to ensure you, they look like you and me, so you can see me how they look like. So yeah, I'm trying to be nice and presentable. What I'm doing at the moment, I'm currently studying law in a scholarship. I'm planning to do my bar pretty soon and to hold the light of justice for people like me going forward. What makes me to be in these situations and what I do, you may have seen on my background a lot of awards and certificates I've got. Those are healings for me. So I extensively work in the community. As I'm currently seeking asylum, I'm not allowed to work. So I work for the courts, I work for the fire service, I work for the citizen advice, and I also work as a vaccine volunteer. So there's a lot of things to say, but I will make it a bit short because just want to focus on the things what City Heart is doing in terms of the victims like me, in terms of the support. It is very important, whoever is listening in this with these sessions today, the webinar, that to understand that what people like me or others, obviously I'm not conveying everyone's voice, but I can at least ensure you whatever I'm saying, it does convey a lot of unheard voices. So City Heart actually was the organizations which is a contract with the Home Office that actually provide caseworkers to people like me, who is actually there when I'm in stress, when I was rescued, when I was, I didn't have anything actually to know that how to deal with the stuff, how to go to my GP, how to, establish my life again. So my caseworker from City Heart plays a very vital role in this little journey I'm having towards a big goal. Most probably, there's a lot of word to describe, but what I would say, it was incredible, and this is why MD is here today. So being one of their client, and it's been official now. I'm joining their trustee board pretty soon in City Heart, but it is very touching for people like me, which comes from inside, that the way City Heart helped me in terms of everything, you can say, from filling up to the form to going with me in the court procedures, going surviving survivors, meeting with other survivors, taking me to the community, introduce me to the other volunteering opportunities which I never thought they do exist. So that's all I would say. And obviously, if you have any questions in terms of anything, I'll share some of my links and things which is related to City Heart. You may read it. Thank you, Phil.
That's amazing. And I mean, looking back over your experience, your lived experience of being a victim, and how do you view that time, and how what would you say is the most important thing for any survivor who gets identified, who say in a business, that lots of business on the call today, and they identify someone in one of their sites that is being exploited? What would you say is the most important thing about engaging a business, engaging with people who've been exploited?
To be honest, when these kind of things happens, I never knew the term is called modern day slavery. What is trafficking? When I was rescued and came across to my caseworker and seeing the paperwork and everything, I've seen, oh, that matches what happened with me. So the survivors like me, we don't actually know. So if you are part of the business, you know actually what are the symptoms, what are the indications of modern day slavery and things. I would say it is best practice, and it will be really great or really helpful or supportive that as an employer, you indicate it, and before you take any steps, at least discuss with that person that are they going through anything. Don't give them an indication, because they will get scared that, oh, he's trying to find something out of me. I should back up myself. But if you indicate it, report it. Because if you don't report it, this hidden scar in our community will increase. And if you think you are out of it or your business is out of it, it is something not to be thought about, because it's happening there. It's right here. It's right here in our community, which you may have not aware of. And this will tremendously impact your business and everything, your performance and everything. If you fail to, detect this kind of symptoms is what is happening. It's very important. Thank you.
And just finally, one of the programs that City Hearts runs is a long-term support program beyond the government support, and we've supported over 500 survivors since 2017 who have left the government support system with no support and have dreams and aspirations about studying law, about having an education, about finding a job, about reuniting with their family. These things that take years, about going through family court, about getting compensation for what's happened to them. And these things are incredibly emotional and take many, many years. And so long-term support, ongoing support is so important. And we've supported hundreds of people, and you've experienced that long-term support.
Yes.
How important was that for you?
I mean, Phil, I will be really honest with you, and whatever I'm saying, I'm just saying it from inside me that it was really important, to be honest. I didn't have anything in my life left. There was nothing there. I couldn't see any light. Some of you will understand who is here. It's very emotional, but I'm not sharing it to get any sympathy or empathy. But why I'm studying law? Because there is injustice, because the system didn't protected me, because the way how things was happening with me, there was very few support. And long-term support was much needed in that time, because by the time I was being recognized as a victim of slavery and trafficking in the UK by UK government or the Home Office, all my support stopped straight away. And when I found out, wow, City Heart has ongoing support, even I am being kicked out of the government system, that I will not be supported financially, and other terms. So it was really helpful. And we as a City Heart and the City Heart itself has that program, and it's helping a lot of people like me. I can ensure, I know a lot of victims now who is being supported by City Heart. So ongoing support, coming out of trauma to our other stuffs, is much needed. We are human beings, so we need to look after each other. Thank you.
Amazing, thanks so much. And I love chatting to you, and you inspire me, you motivate me. All that you do and your passion to give back and to make a difference, not just now, but you have a long-term vision, and that's so inspiring for people like me, and I'm sure for everybody on the call today, to engage with this issue, to see people as human beings, identify the risks and the problems, and to help people because it's the right thing to do to get people out of these situations, and then to begin to put right that wrong that has happened to them. And that's a long journey, and that's something City Hearts would love to do. I'm sure we'll have questions for you, MD, so we'll come back to you in a second. You just go to the final slide. This is just a couple of ways that the business that we engage with businesses. We have obviously corporate sponsors that help us. The long-term support that I was talking about, we have recovery sponsors, and they kind of it costs a certain amount per year to support someone long-term, and so we ask for recovery sponsors to kind of sponsor people's restoration journey. And then Bright Future membership, that's membership of a separate cooperative. I can tell you more information about that if you want, but that's a 5,000 membership fee, and I can chat more individually or offline if you want to kind of find out more details about offering work to survivors in a supported pathway. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Phil. Thank you, MD. I think that's done a really fantastic job of just reminding us that what we're talking about here is we're talking about people's lives. It's not about policies and box ticking and procedures. It's about people's lives. So hopefully after today, there'll be many of you getting in touch with Phil at City Hearts. And I know that MD has put a note into the chat, so maybe Rosie, if you could share that with everybody on the call, if it's not already, with a link to MD's story covered by the BBC, and how to connect might be LinkedIn or something else with MD as well. So we've got some questions that have come in. So there's been a simple one, actually, I'm going to start with, very simple one for Phil. Is City Hearts in Wales? If not, are there plans to expand to Wales?
Oh, hello. Yeah, took me a while for my internet to come on then. We're not currently having a base in Wales, but I live in Liverpool and my wife is Welsh, so it's close to and we do support people and have supported people in Wales. The systems and support that we offer often means that people are moved to our safe houses, and so we support people that come from different parts of the UK, and then those people in long-term support obviously may move to different spaces and places. But if there is something specific in Wales that you want to discuss and chat with us as a charity about helping, I can talk to you more about what services would be best and how we can help you to support people in Wales. That would be great. Yeah, happy. I'll pop my email in the chat now, and you can email me. Okay,
fab. Thanks, Phil. If you do have any questions, please pop them in, send them through to us using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I have a question for, I guess, for Charlotte, Luciana, Maria, and Doug as well. So thinking about, you've all talked about collaborative working and that culture. You all have that culture of collaboration across the value chain. So it's the the $1 million question of what tips could you offer to other clients or contractors in terms of making collaboration work around things like labour exploitation and modern slavery? Charlotte, I'll come to you first. Oh, is Charlotte still there?
Sorry, I was on mute. Can you see me and hear me?
Yes,
Thanks.
I can see and hear you, yeah.
We started from the beginning with getting all of our kind of main partners together in a room to discuss some of these issues and challenges, and started with kind of building a broad standing, and from that we looked at what we might co-fund or fund ourselves in terms of some sort of innovative interventions. And I think it's really important that this does cost money to do adequate due diligence, and often it will, those kind of costs will diminish over time as you kind of build things into your systems, but we need to pilot things, and building in respect for human rights will incur some level of cost, and so we were willing to support with that. Just setting the tone kind of from the top with our kind of leaders at Sky, talking to our partners, leadership teams, and saying that we're looking to find any vulnerabilities. We're looking to identify where there could be points in the system where people are becoming at risk as a result, and that finding people that are subject to exploitation or indicators that might raise a concern will be seen as not a negative thing. We are not going to be walking away from a relationship with you. We are there, and we will be willing to work with anyone, any subcontractor, supplier who's part of this, to really improve their practices. And often some of the things that we've found have been where things have been overlooked, where there might be slight gaps in a system that people just hadn't thought about, and it was really just about saying, actually, if we can bring people together, bring subcontractors together in a room, people can share their experiences of filling some of those gaps or of how they work differently, and that's really fostered that for us.
Okay, great, thank you, Charlotte. Maria or Luciana?
Yeah, Stephanie, I think what Charlotte has just said about highlighting that we are not breaking any relationships, but just like helping each other develop how we manage this is very important. And I think for me, transparency and accepting that, acknowledging that we don't have all the answers. So I think we are all going through a learning experience. For example, for us, when we've gone through the Achilles audits, the Achilles auditors have been like a great source of support in the Stronger Together. Sometimes we say like, I'm facing this, I don't know what to do. So collaboration across the industry with peers, just being humble and transparent really helps to address some of these situations, and the same with our supply chain.
It's very important, as Maria said, in terms of this collaboration and being transparent, is actually at the same time as well offering support to our supply chain when they are working on these grievances. Signposting them where is the best, place for them to go, offering them support, for example, in terms of kids who are working with us and Stronger Together, building responsibly. A lot of our supply chain is connected, is partnered with Supply Chain Sustainability School. So I think that's the best way for us working with our supply chain, is actually really supporting them, and then we learn, I think, from all these experiences.
Okay, thanks, Luciana, Maria. Doug, any comments to add to that? From your perspective?
Difficult to add to that. I think they've nailed it in terms of the importance of collaboration in this area. If any of you are sat there thinking that you need to protect anything you do in this space and you don't want anyone to know about it, it's all really, really sensitive. I would rethink that a little bit. And your approach needs to be a bit more transparent and open to that. I think the big point around here, and Charlotte touched on it with costs of doing this stuff, it does cost money, and remedies cost time, right? Finding remedies cost time. And the more that major players, tier one clients, principal contractors, tier ones, tier twos can do to work on collaborative remedies, the better. And the school being one example of that, because it's the most efficient way for us making sure that this isn't an issue for us in 10 years time, and it's something that everyone has got locked down.
Fantastic, thank you, Doug. And you've mentioned there are so many organisations that have so much resource and help in different areas on modern slavery. There's Stronger Together, there's GLAA, there's Slave Free Alliance, there's Unseen. There's so many resources out there, and it's like we've said, it's not an area that we're competing in. It's an area where we need to collaborate. Okay, let me have a look at the other questions then. Alex, hi Alex. We've had a question. So you've said it's great to see Sky client leading from the front, and then you had a question around umbrella companies. And did you have any umbrella companies? Are you aware if you had any umbrella companies in your supply chain? And if so, did you get an understanding of the types of pay models they were using to pay contingent workers? So I don't know, Charlotte, if you're in a position to answer that one.
Yeah, I can take that at a high level. So we have a list of a kind of ever evolving and kind of responsive list of flags to look for across all of our touch points, through audits, through supplier engagement, through worker surveys. And in all of those we have a regular on Elstree, we have a monthly working group where those are where anything that has come through are raised, and we conduct additional due diligence, on-site reviews, assessments, additional worker sort of engagement, if there are any flags, and obviously umbrella schemes will be one of those, and if that was raised, these sort of on-site assessments that would look at deductions would obviously having kind of minimum wage, and for us, London living wage as minimum standards for anybody working on a site to be being paid would be something that we'd be then looking for, to make sure whether they're a self-employed contractor or a worker, or an employed individual, we'd be looking at that and seeking remedy if that was not the case.
Okay, thanks, Charlotte. Maria and Luciana, any experience or thoughts on the whole idea of umbrella companies?
Yeah, I think pretty much is echoing what Charlotte has said. So we ask our contractors during tendering to confirm the agencies that they are working on and what processes they have in place to manage those. And then it comes sometimes through the ethical, the engagement site audits at the agencies that they are working on, that there may be like a sub-layer of a sub-layer. So we look into those ones in more detail and then address them specifically.
Okay, thank you. Doug, anything to add to that? Or Phil?
No, I don't think I don't think I have much more but to add to that, but
okay,
one knows it's a focus area there.
We have a question for Maria. Maria, I think you've answered this on the chat, but just for other people who probably may not have seen that. You've been asked, for your ethical labour management system, do you follow any ISO standard in shaping this? So if you could just share your
So I said that we have used our 14001 environmental management system just mostly because it's the one that I'm the most familiar with, and I was working very closely with the person who developed our ethical labour management system to address to sort of like create the framework for our management system, and we do the exact same things like internal audits, management reviews, etc. So I know there is a British standard 22,570, I think, or 25,700. Yeah, there is so many numbers that it just gets too confusing. So coming out we've been keeping an eye on, as I say, just continual improvement and updating what we have to make sure we align with the recommendations out there and the best practice.
Yeah, brilliant. And yes, thank you for mentioning. Yes, the British standard is 25,700, and it's organisational response to modern slavery. So it's guidance for managing modern slavery risks in operations, supply chains, and the wider operating environment. I think somebody had asked a question around, are there any posters available to inform and to raise awareness amongst workers around modern slavery? And I think he responds on the chat, yes, there are plenty of posters. I've got some signposting, GLAA, Stronger Together, various other organisations. So yes, if you are starting this journey and thinking about awareness raising, there will be something out there that can help. So don't reinvent the wheel. There'll be something you can access hopefully easily and for free. I'm just looking at any other questions. I think those are all the questions, and we've only got a few minutes left. So,
can I?
Yes.
Ask a question?
Yeah. Hi, MD. Yeah, go for it.
As a panel, I'm allowed to ask questions to the
Of course you are. It's your privilege.
I was just trying to share one of the thought I had since yesterday night before I go to sleep, because I was quite happy and really excited to see lots of investors here, the people who are here actually running the big companies around the world, international companies. From a survivor perspective, people like me who's gone through a lot, and you have seen Phil has shown you that sandwich, obviously not to put any kind of vegan or vegetarian offended, but it can be any sandwich. What I'm asking to the employers here, or the people are here, especially Sky, Multiplex, and Miss Charlotte, she's the human rights lead. Going forward, will you be kind, or will you be thinking to join or do any kind of collaborations for people like me who is coming from grassroots and trying their best with this kind of experience to come forward to help in this process, giving us the chance to explore, bloom, or whatever you say in the job markets, because I don't have that much of old boys networks and things, so it's very hard for me to go there or to reach there. So will you please keep that on your considerations, whoever it is there and others? I would like to thank the participants as well, that going forward, will you think people like us as well, not just to eradicate modern day slavery, but to look after those people who is the survivors. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I think I touched on it at the beginning. The remediation piece tends to be the piece that is people don't have at the forefront of their minds. It's, you know, what happens next. So yeah, thank you for leaving us all with that kind of thought and action, I suppose, around that. So thank you. Okay, I think we've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to share my screen again just to do some signposting, really, because obviously you've heard a lot today. So I just want to help with signposting to some resources that we have within the school that can help. So can you see my screen okay? Yes, okay. So we've got I think I mentioned Operation Cardenas earlier on, which I would urge you all to go and have a look at. It's a really detailed report. It was looking specifically at the construction sector, and it's very much about the lessons learned. So there's so much, so many surprising facts and figures and stories about how this happened. So I would urge you to have a look at that. And Operation Fort, again, that's another one, the UK's largest anti-slavery prosecution. So do have a look at those. Within the school, we have a number of learning pathways. You can find them from your company dashboard. And one of those is, we have 3 on modern slavery, but there's one that's specifically looking at setting up your site to combat modern slavery. So there's got a modern slavery sustainability short that you can share as toolbox talks for your workers on site to how to spot the signs of modern slavery. And then there is a guidance document that the school's developed, setting up your site to combat modern slavery, that talks about the AIR model, the kind of awareness, identification and respond model. And within there are signposting and links to the posters that we've talked about and to those practical resources that can help you with your response to tackling this from a site perspective. And there's an e-learning module there as well. These are some of the more resources in the school. We've got the GLAA workers' rights leaflets in different languages that we talked about, the checklist poster. You've got the SOS hand signal that Stronger Together have developed with their partnerships. We've got modern slavery due diligence checklist. Yeah, these are just a snapshot of some of the resources that we have. Some guidance documents. So we've got the guidance on right to work. And there's lots of tips from our school partners on tips around how you embed this within the supply chain as well, and how you work with your supply chain to ensure that right to work checks are being conducted in the right way, and how to use them as ways to kind of spot signs of exploitation. We've got the City Hearts No One Left Behind report there. We've got an e-learning module there around fairness, inclusion and respect on site, why it matters and how to achieve it. Again, thinking back to the exploitation spectrum, all of these vulnerabilities, well-being, they're all interlinked. And then we've got a workshop coming up on the 20th of September that's specifically looking at using procurement and supply chain management to combat modern slavery. So do have a look at that. Feel free to book on. We've got the People Matter Charter that you may be familiar with. This has been developed through the school. I think we have over 140 signatories, including clients, main contractors and suppliers, who are all committing to developing a workforce strategy to tackle all of the people issues, which are all interlinked. So employment conditions, human rights, right to work, training and skills, and so on. So that's something you may want to have a look at. If you look on the school platform, you can actually do an assessment looking at your organisation's maturity around all of those people related topics, well-being, wages, human rights, and it's a confidential assessment, but you can benchmark yourselves against others within your sector and against everybody else within the school. So for here you can see this organisation's how they've scored themselves, the blue, so they're more mature in terms of tackling modern slavery than the average within the school. If you do the assessment, you then get an action plan linking to resources to help you develop, and it's about continuous improvement. You can keep doing the assessment. And that's it. How are we doing? 2 minutes to go. So thank you so much to all of our speakers. Really delighted with the content of your presentation, some really great insights. So thank you so much. We'll be sharing everything with you after today, including the responses to the polls. So please do share your feedback. We're always looking to understand what worked well today and what could we do to improve future events. So thank you, everybody, and hope to see you at a school event again soon. Thanks.